Everyone's talking about AI taking jobs, but what about the jobs that AI is creating? And I'm not talking about being a vibe curator or a prompt engineer, but hands on work. Today, we are exploring how extended reality and artificial intelligence are reshaping this job market and helping people train faster, smarter, and creating a wave of high paying jobs most people aren't even looking at yet. I'm Laura Lee Elliott. I'm the co founder of Dauntless XR, and I'm here today with my fellow co founder, Sophia Lazaro, and our guest, Devesh Jain. Devesh is an XR entrepreneur and emerging technologies leader, driving initiatives around XR, AI, and most recently, quantum at the World Economic Forum. He previously co-founded GeoTesseract, an XR startup acquired by Reliance Geo, and built the Global Collaboration Village, an XR platform for public-private decision-making. Passionate about the future of work and education, he bridges cutting-edge XR and AI with real-world impact, and outside of tech, he produces electronic music, plays the handpan, and scuba dives. So Devesh, welcome to the Dauntless podcast.
Thank you for having me. Super excited to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Can you tell us more about your world with the World Economic Forum and how you got into XR?
Yeah, absolutely. At the World Economic Forum, I lead a couple of initiatives at the intersection of emerging tech and how it collaborates with the public-private infrastructure and even looking at some aspects of governance more recently. And this includes XR and AI. More recently, I've also taken in quantum technologies into my portfolio. How I got into XR was actually about 10 years ago, is when I had an opportunity to do a bachelor thesis at the MIT Media Lab in Boston. And I was working, honestly, on a project which I didn't think I'd use XR for. We were building a low-cost eye diagnostic device because that was something that is actually quite helpful in predicting diseases like diabetes. So, for example, an early marker of diabetes shows up in your retina as black spots, which is often used as an early screening for type 2 diabetes. However, the devices that can produce those high quality images, they cost roughly about $20,000 to $30,000 and are not very accessible for a lot of developing markets. So my thesis was essentially around how can we build a really low cost DIY version of that. And what was needed to be done is to build a system, an optical system, which could shine light through the very small gap that you have in your pupil, and also align a camera and also have people look at different directions while all of that is happening. The brainwave came that, hey, let's use a Google Cardboard and let's say put a camera on top of it and just align the optics in such a way that it could work. And that was how VR got into it, or I got into VR, was to use it for eye diagnostics. And I ended up building a $99 version of that at the end of the thesis, which we were able to scale in a lot of clinics in India. But anyway, so that's how I got into XR in general. And that was 10 years ago. And then I came back to India wanting to continue to build in XR. And that's when I co-founded GeoTesseract, which later got acquired.
Yeah, that's quite an amazing story. Just like casually went to MIT, built a $99 tool that can diagnose diabetes, and then went and founded a company that got acquired, especially in the XR space, which is pretty uncommon at this point. So yeah, that's quite the journey. I have so many questions about that. One of the interesting crossovers that I didn't know we had is when I was at NYU, it was a little more than 10 years ago. We won't say exactly how many years, but I lost a startup pitch competition to a company that was also scanning pupils and irises to predict or to diagnose disease. And they were using phone cameras with the flash because they needed the light for, I don't remember exactly what they were diagnosing. I don't think it was diabetes. I think it might have been like whether you needed glasses or not. And it was interesting that their approach, they needed something with a really bright source of light. So they're like, well, why don't we use the flash on a camera? Granted, they weren't quite the smartphones that we have today. It was a little more ancient.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and it's interesting because we also thought of that and then sort of wanted to use that approach with the light of the camera. At least in our testing, what we realize is it lets your pupil to constrict more, which makes it even more difficult for the camera to get a really good wide angle view of the fundus. And that was such a difficult problem to get and to solve, to kind of time the camera and the flash at the same way. And yeah, it was fun times for sure. Very challenging project.
I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about what quantum is and
Mm.
what you're working on? Because I think we've all seen it in the headlines here and there, like, oh, Microsoft did something cool with quantum, and like the tech bros are talking about this quantum thing, but like, what is it?
Absolutely. What comes to mind in people's mind when they think of quantum is just this very cool looking computer made of really high grade gold and platinum and a lot of different materials. The quantum technologies is obviously much more than that. So quantum computing is just one aspect of it. And what it essentially is a non-deterministic computer which can do multiple parallel calculations at the same time, often at speeds which are so massive that to put things in perspective, a recent breakthrough that Google made with their chip Willow earlier this year, which computed a very famous algorithm, which is kind of the benchmark, which typically would take an order of magnitude of time to compute on classical computers, which would extend beyond the life of the universe. But the quantum computing chip Willow was able to do it in 5 minutes. And that's one key aspect of essentially being able to parallelize computing and make it so fast and so advanced that you could then solve simulations or solve problems which the classical computers wouldn't be able to do in any reasonable amount of time. But that's just the computing aspect. There's also things around quantum sensing. So how you can apply quantum technologies to build sensors which can detect changes or in the natural properties of materials to again to a certain level of detail and resolution, which wouldn't be possible by classical sensors. And in similar fashion, they have applications in telecommunications, in security. Like, again, I think that's probably one of the more common known pieces as well as around quantum cryptography, in the sense that our current cryptography is all built on algorithms which are obviously difficult to crack for classical computers in any given reasonable amount of time. But for a quantum computer, it would be a matter of a millisecond or a nanosecond. So how do we, again, build our cryptographic infrastructure in that? But the most fascinating for me in my convergence work is actually around quantum's acceleration of AI. And in turn, AI's acceleration in figuring out a lot of these challenges in quantum material or materials which would help to make quantum computers closer to reality. And that's really fascinating to see how we can create an optimization in AI and machine learning using a lot of these quantum computing algorithms.
Is AI the primary use case for quantum computing right now?
So AI is definitely one of the key use cases that we have seen. However, quantum simulations, quantum sensing, and quantum cryptography, the ones that I mentioned, they have been quite in the market for much longer. I would say quantum cryptography is where there's a lot of focus already in the market, as well as in quantum sensing, especially when it comes to how can we use quantum sensing as an alternative to GPS in flight navigation. So many niche applications that I keep reading about every day that I'm like, wow, this is a whole new parallel universe, quite literally, which we are uncovering through this technology.
It's an interesting contrast because quantum gives us the ability to do computing that does look like magic, right? If you didn't know what was going on under the hood, you'd be like, yeah, we have magic now. On the flip side, it also means that all of our encryption, the way that we password protect everything, is now null and void because it can crack a password in milliseconds that would take a hacker or a traditional computer years or longer than the lifespan of a human, which is, I think, probably why there's
Mhm.
so much interest on that cryptography side of things, because whoever figures it out stands to make a lot of money. And obviously, investors want to be in on that. Quantum is enabling AI more computing power so that we can use AI to tell quantum to figure out how to make quantum better.
Or how to make AI better?
Sorry, yeah. And it goes in a
Yeah.
big circle. It's a symbiotic,
Yeah.
parasitic relationship.
On the note that you were saying earlier about investors and companies to make a lot of money in this quantum, post quantum cryptography world, there's also a lot of obviously fear, but also interest from governments of how can they safeguard national security, national secrets. We see a lot of these governments, be it Europe, the European Union, the US, China, and a lot of the major powers setting deadlines internally for their nations to become quantum secure by such and certain time.
There's a relationship between scientific and technological evolution and policy. And you're hitting on
Yeah.
that right there. We often only see it from one side, from our angle, which is why it's so interesting to get your perspective. Given that you have a different perspective on that relationship, I think one of the common headlines around AI and how it's being accelerated by technologies like quantum is how it's going to impact the labor market. And I'd love to delve further into your perspective on specifically how you think it might impact the skilled labor market, and how will people experience that change today, and what could that change look like in the future?
In the US alone, about 400,000 skilled labor jobs went unfulfilled. And this number is quite expected to grow to 2 million, according to one estimates, by 2033. So, irrespective of AI, we are already seeing that the skilled labor market is having an acute shortage. And one of the aspects that I want to talk about immediately is, of course, how AI can help in assisted learning to make these learning journeys faster, because it often takes a person who would want to become a skilled tradesperson 2 to 5 years in an apprenticeship program, or they start with a trade school and they go into an apprenticeship program. Often these apprenticeship programs are funded by the companies who would like to hire them as full-time workers. But if you see that there's already a lack of these workers, the trainer who's training them is actually the employee who's already employed by the company, is having to do his or her their own work, but also having to then train someone else. So that's already an immediate value proposition that we have with AI, and blending immersive technologies back into it, even to use that as a way to kickstart and I would say fast forward the learning process for the people who would want to get into this opportunity.
The shortage that you talk about is very, very real. I mean, I think Laura Lee experienced it firsthand in some of her early careers, and it wasn't nearly as bad as it is now. I'm curious, many of the world's most developed economies, the peoples in those economies have been taught to aspire after white collar work. Why do you think AI will shift that? Or do you think AI will shift that in terms of the balance of power in the way that blue collar versus white collar work is perceived within an economy?
The digital revolution, in some ways, made people aspire to be white collar workers and made people think that, oh, we should all become engineers or designers, or get into the tech world, sit behind a laptop and make bajillions of dollars. And that's kind of being turned around its head with the AI revolution, right? Where now a lot of these jobs are no longer safe. And what it actually pays off to do is to potentially get into the skilled labor market, because the AI driven world is going to need a lot of data centers, a lot of infrastructure built specifically for that. How much energy is needed for driving these technologies, be it AI or even be it quantum. There's a huge need for our infrastructure. I think recently saw an article by Jensen Huang in Fortune.com where he said that we're going to be needing hundreds and thousands of these workers, either plumbers or electricians and carpenters, and they're going to be the backbone of the infrastructure in this AI-driven world. I also see that for the younger generation, they're more pragmatic in how they want to live their life. They are kind of disillusioned with the whole white collar ideal in terms of spending hours behind a laptop, working with little work life balance, the stress associated with it. Their measure of success is very different. And I think this is a unique opportunity for those younger generation to also kind of rethink and reevaluate the kind of freedom that they could get in taking up these kind of roles.
Are there any other jobs that you've seen come up that are kind of in that same vein of, this is a skilled trade, it exists today, but maybe hasn't been spotlighted quite as much just because of the way the world has worked so far?
HVAC comes to mind again. HVAC stands essentially for all the refrigeration, the cooling systems that we go through, that we have in our homes and even in our industrial settings. There are so many specializations within just that field, because they have so many varied applications in different sets of industries, because there are so many different types of coolant types and machineries that require that particular skill set.
I see a couple parallels with what activity is going on in the M&A space because you mentioned HVAC. There's a ton of roll up happening right now with private equity and acquirers like us buying up HVAC companies. If you're an enterprising individual, if you're, an entrepreneur, what opportunities do you see that exist for innovators building XR and AI solutions for these skilled trades? And if you are seeing that, what kind of approaches seem most impactful right now?
I like to think of it in four different stages of the journey that you can augment or you can help to solve this problem in. So the first is, of course, train that we've spoken about. So training and how do you make immersive AI assisted training for the prospective skilled laborers of tomorrow. The second is building solutions which augments their work that they are doing today and that they would be doing tomorrow. A lot of these skilled traders, as you may know, needs to have their hands free. And what is the best mechanism to have them assist them or and augment them with information that can be broadcasted live to them as a means through which they can get more context of the job that they are doing, which often at some point would start to fade the gap between training and doing, because then you're kind of on the job learning with an additional information that's coming to you, that's being provided to you. And if you also throw in AI where it's able to augment itself, understand what's the context. The third is supervision. Supervision for these workers who are on the job or on field, but may not yet have the right knowledge or information, but is present with some of their senior engineers sitting miles across in a different geography. They could help to supervise what they are doing. They could help to guide them. And last but not the least is upskilling. Because over the next decade, 2 decades, 3 decades or so, you're going to see continuously with the progress of AI and robotics, these machines also evolving quite in a rapid way. The skills and the knowledge that they're acquiring today will only maybe be useful for a few years later until the machines again get smarter. They have new protocols to learn, and that's another space that they could build in.
I love all those examples. Those are incredibly specific and helpful. I think help people think in this space in between our digital economy and our physical infrastructure. Because I do think for a while, innovation was very much, at least the innovation that was most talked about in the media and lauded, was very divorced from our physical infrastructure and was very, very connected to this idea of a digital economy or a digital infrastructure. There's this whole other world where wealth could be created in, right? And what I love about all of your examples is I think because the limiting factor for AI has become physical aspects. And then from a very biased perspective, I just think because we're talking about physical infrastructure, XR is a perfect medium in that space
Yeah.
because it joins
Mhm.
your physical environment and augments it.
100%. If you just look at training, and of course, the same thing you can find in all four, but if you just look at even just training, a lot of the apprentice work that happens is a person goes along with already a trained person for a job. The person who's learning is being supervised by this other person who's in this trade. Now, we could already have, and we already see these form factors becoming so nice and so lightweight that you could be wearing those glasses and you just need to train the AI LLMs on or AI models on the camera feed that's coming in, provide contextual information that, hey, you should probably do this, not do that. And you have your own AI personal assistant, which is kind of training you while not having to have that person beside you. And I think that's something that's immediately possible. You already have AI models that can annotate what's happening in an image quite accurately. You already have classes that are easy to interface and are open source enough to kind of get those camera feeds out and build that infrastructure. And you already have a lot of these learning content. So if there's someone who's looking for an idea to build on right now, I think this is where you could start and literally get a few customers in the next few weeks, even.
I mean, I love to hear that because all four of those things that you mentioned are things that we work on at Dauntless. So,
That
and
too. Maybe that's why I liked the list.
yeah, the concept that, a lot of people are familiar with VR training or with extended reality from a VR training lens. They're like, yes, it's a thing you can put on in a very controlled space and go through this kind of like prefab experience and, get a degree of realism, right? And where that kind of fell apart for us and the kind of business cases we were building for is that you need to go out into the field. You need to go do hands-on work. Like, yes, you can train for this in a classroom all the live long day, but like at the end of that day, you have to go out and actually do the thing. So we wanted to build something that can go with you. And it's really encouraging to hear that there's not just one industry that is going to be applicable for. It sounds like that is more, rather than being an outlier, and rather than being an outlier, it might be more of a trend, which is great for us. And the kind of see what I see, being able to monitor or
Real-time support.
QA/QC, using a headset is also great. And we've been looking at using computer vision and AI to be able to do that kind of automatically. So you don't build that initial bad muscle memory or incorrect muscle memory of doing a task. It can catch you before you make the mistake too many times, which is a fascinating use case. And I think one of those things, when done well, will feel like magic also.
Learning is such a personalized experience, right? So as you were saying, if you are able to, if you're building that, and I'm sure you must already be seeing some of those results coming back to you, is that it will start to feel magic to each and every person in their own way. And it wouldn't feel like, oh, this is not for me, because it's going to adapt to you and to your needs as well.
How we progress that training ideal versus how training is done today. How do you see the collaboration between industry, policymakers, and educators?
In my opinion, it's fairly straightforward, but also quite difficult to do because there's so many different moving parts. To put it very simply, I would say the industry needs to set standards. The educators kind of need to embrace it, and the policymakers need to incentivize it. Because a lot of the skilled labor market is driven by accreditation and very specific certifications that are governed by individual bodies in each of these governments, I think a lot of focus should definitely go there in being able to bring these things together. And what I mean to and in some ways, I feel that's already starting to happen. Like I can see there are early signs in governments and in governance that they are also starting to see this huge gap which we already have. And I know that from last month, I think the UK government has started accepting has started giving out some grants and accepting applications on how can new innovations help to fill this gap of the skilled labor market.
It's really encouraging to hear that there's, some government and policy support like in the works. The sentiment doesn't seem to be like, well, we'll just let people figure it out for themselves.
Unfortunately, we do live in a world where technology moves much, much farther ahead than policy. And often we need to have a lot of enterprises breaking through and trying to sort of prove this is really going to drive value for the government at a national scale and for governments at their regional or local scale as well. But I do envision that future where immersive or AI assisted certification or completion of a skilled training program is completely accepted and is used as a benchmark and not just by individual tech firms. I think that would build a lot of trust and a lot of scale and would be the kind of incentive and catalyzation that we need in this market.
So is that our next venture, Sophia? We're going to create an XR training standard that's accepted worldwide.
That could be fun. I could get
be.
behind that.
Count me in.
Other than policy and regulation, what barriers do you see that still exist for the adoption of XR and AI in this skilled trades training?
This is going to sound such a cliched answer. For XR, it's always content, right? To begin with. A lot of these training ends up becoming a huge content production task, and a lot of companies who start into this also end up sometimes becoming just a boutique content production studio. And you need designers, you need developers, you need 3D artists, you need modelers, project managers, and whatnot. You start to see that, oh, you need a lot of upfront investment to build even a decent amount of curricula. That's still there. However, I do see that's really fast changing with generative models being able to do a lot of those developments and a lot of that content production. So that is going to get commoditized and very easy to get through. The digital divide of using very specific technologies like XR is still quite wide. So the accessibility, affordability, and the ease of use, again, these are things that anybody who's been in XR and no matter how long or how short, has been hearing this over and over again. And that still remains the case, especially traditionally for the folks who opt to be in the trades, in the skilled trades job, are historically not from a very tech savvy background by default. And the industry itself is also quite tech averse to begin with. So that creates a very big challenge to kind of push this through. So on one end, you are trying to teach them something as modern as XR, where a lot of their work actually happens on paper.
If you've been listening to this podcast before, you've already heard me complain about this because my background was industrial construction and engineering. So that is why Dauntless exists, is because I was like, we can't go and build these really complex and critical projects and be using pen and paper. But it's what you're trained on, right? Like it's what the industry has always used. It's reliable. It works whether there's Wi-Fi or 5G or a charging station. You don't need an adapter. Like a clipboard is pretty resilient.
And probably another thing which we are also starting to see is an over reliance. And this is on the opposite side, which is over reliance on AI could also end up de-skilling you. So these platforms also need to think when they're building it that they don't end up using AI as a substitute for the human mind. They need to augment the human who's there, but not to make them into lifeless robots with just hands to kind of fix something. But that's, I would say, not such a big problem to look at today, but it could become a problem.
I think it's a
You ever
problem
seen that?
designers are thinking a lot about. Do you want to encourage the good kind of cognitive offloading and not the bad kind? So an example in XR is we may blur things that are in your peripheral because we don't want to distract you trying to identify them, because you don't need to identify them right now because they're not where we want your focus, right? But like a bad kind, right, would be you don't want to do it for them. There's this fine line, right, of what is a good kind of cognitive offloading that lends itself to what the brain already wants to do naturally, and then to your point, a level of cognitive offloading that de-skill the human worker, right? Because the goal would be if we can simplify the training process and protocol for the 80% of your work, that when those 20% scenarios come up that are much more technically complex, you have more brain power to apply against them because you didn't drain it on the 80% of the work.
It's interesting that you went there, because my first thought was the way you protect against that is you don't let people use these tools too early in their training. Like you have to learn it the old-fashioned way first, and then you get the XR, the AI, the quantum, the blockchain, like whatever it is, you get that after you already know how to do it. And I hadn't considered that at all, that you could design for it, right? I think it also pushes people towards this really uncomfortable conversation of you might just have to restrict when you have access to these tools until you get to a point where you've quote unquote earned them. When I was in undergrad, I did an archaeology rotation. One of my degrees is in anthropology, and the kids in the forensic rotation got the really fancy meter to survey their site. It was all digital. You put that thing on the ground and it just used lasers and like measured everything. The archaeology students who were out in a swamp, we got the completely manual one. Like one of us had to hike off yonder with a ruler and go stand there while the other person looked through the site and like made it plumb and like did all of everything completely manually. And this was in Canada, so at least like there were no poisonous snakes in the grass that we were trekking through. And it took us forever. The first week, like just getting our datum point and like doing all that took forever. By the end, we were pretty fast. And then the last couple days, we joined up with the forensic kids on campus, and we got to see this magical digital meter. The one we had was called a dumpy meter because it was not tech enabled at all. And these kids struggled so hard with the fancy meter. And like we came in and we're like, oh, you just like, and they're like, how did you do that so fast? Well, we knew how to do it the hard way. So when you gave us this tool, it was like so easy, but they had nothing to compare it to. They'd always had this like kind of digital crutch.
I think that is a good practice for many forms of technology, is learn it the difficult way and then you can do it. It's like my, not the same, but my dad, we had to learn how to change a tire before we could take a car by ourselves. And like, yes, you can call roadside assistance, but just in case. And so that roadside assistance is doing it correctly, you need to know how to change a tire.
Foundational knowledge always pays off, no matter what field.
One question we've started asking, which actually came from a tangent on one of our earlier interviews is what features does your dream headset have?
I've always believed this technology should disappear the moment it comes to you. And the moment that happens, that's when it's doing its job. So I would say the first thing is whatever set of features they are, they need to kind of just disappear. I'm a glasses wearer, so I'm okay to wear a pair of glasses. A lot of people might not be, right? So how do we even solve for that? I cannot speak for people who've never worn a glass before, but maybe they have worn sunglasses, so that serves a purpose. So how do you make a glass, the XR glasses, good enough in some ways that they want to wear it just like they wear sunglasses? That means is it needs to have at least the same amount of light weightedness, the same amount of design, the same kind of ruggedness in terms of the glasses are probably the most the toughest thing, one of the toughest things that you use, because at least for me, I treat them like anything. I throw them, they get dropped from n number of floors. Sometimes they've been on water, they've been in sand, they've been in gravel. So it needs to be rugged even from that point of view. And I guess the killer use case is still out there, but I think in some ways an AI assisted co-pilot of like a friend of yours who can help you to figure out life in some ways could be that in use case enough for people to use it like they wear sunglasses when there's sunlight.
It reminded me of one of the quotes we actually heard at AWE. It was Palmer Luckey's keynote. And he said, the best user interface is no user interface, or something to that effect, or not something that, if unless you've been designing applications or designing XR, not something you would think about in day to day when you're using, one of these, or, whatever other device, your precious iPad. And I have nothing against iPads. I love iPads. Just, people get way too attached to them.
They do. They
Yeah,
go around everywhere with
I
them.
personally thought I never really understood the concept of iPads. Like I'm not against them, but I'm just like, why do they exist? They're big, they're small. Also, it's just not the right size.
They've never made their way
I,
into my workflow. Like
yeah,
my laptop when it's docked has a purpose. My
yeah.
laptop when it's undocked has a purpose, and my phone has a purpose. And I have specific things that I go to each device or each setup in the case of my laptop for. And the tablet never entered my like mainstream. But for most people I know that use it really consistently, it replaced a laptop.
Yes.
What do you guys think of the Meta Ray Ban display, but also the gesture interface that they have,
I want to try
the
it
new
so
Meta
bad.
Stand?
I mean, one of my main points of friction is like running hundreds of probably now in the thousands of people through demos is helping them get comfortable with what we refer to as presenting your hands. Like you really have to use bigger gestures. And this was never a problem for me personally because I talk with my hands in normal life. But most people don't. So the idea that you can help the device communicate with something in a way that's significantly more subtle, I think will lower some of the discomfort factor of putting on a headset and feeling like you really have to put your hand in front of you to do something and not be able to use your hand more subtly at your side. So I have not tried it. I've only watched demos so far, but I really want to. I think it's a very clever solution, and I think it's a lot more compelling than a controller.
Haven't tried it either. I'm super looking forward to it. I have played around with the neural wristbands, not this one, but others before, and they do work like magic when it works well. Of course, I don't think people would want to wear another bracelet,
Yeah.
which is not just for fashion. That's just something that I worry a little bit about, but I guess it's good for Google and Apple because they do have a smartphone, a smartwatch market, and they could capitalize on that. So it's really interesting to see also how one company comes up with a breakthrough and then it paves the way for someone else to actually adopt it into their existing product. Nice.
That's a good point. There could be a future that's not too far away that there is no smartwatch sold that is not also capable of acting as a neural band.
I really hope it's awesome, because to be able to have a display in that lightweight of a form factor is what we have all been asking for forever. My concern with Meta is they like their garden walls and they don't typically let other devices into their ecosystem. So we can hope, we can ask
Yeah.
nicely. Will it happen? I don't know. But it does look like with the Meta Ray-Bans displays that they are going to open up an app store or some kind of environment where you can put third-party apps on that device, because I think the utility of having a display in the Ray-Bans is not that high if all you can do is Facebook and Meta stuff, which that is not a
Yeah.
knock on Facebook/Meta. It's just the nature of what they do. I do more things in my life than what they provide. Obviously, that's very self-serving because we want to get our apps on there as soon as possible. I hope we are able to combine some of these wearable devices so that we don't have two wrists full of sensors, rings on every finger.
Gadgets. Yeah.
It just becomes a whole glove at one point.
Get ready with me.
Yeah.
Let me explain every sensor and which
Yeah.
of my kit it interacts with.
If people have been listening and they want to connect with you, Devesh, where can they find you, and what is the best way to do that?
Best way to do that would be to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I don't know if we can share a link with them
Yeah, we'll
separately.
list the link
Yeah.
below so you can connect or follow over on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming today. This was a great conversation.
Thank you for having me.
This was a super high value episode. Thank you for joining us. I think you bought a lot of really valuable information and then also gave people things to think about that they've probably never considered before, which is also very exciting and sometimes scary, but we try to err on the side of exciting. And to those listening, if you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to check out this episode next because I think you'll like it too.